The movie set was busy with people moving around. Everyone had a job to do. Some were fixing the lights, others were making sure the cameras were in the right spot, and some were checking the script one last time. It was almost time to start filming. Inside her trailer, Sandra Bullock took a deep breath. She looked at herself in the mirror. Today was going to be hard. She had acted in many serious scenes before, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was because of the scene itself. Or maybe it was because of the director, Jack Caldwell. He wanted everything to be perfect. He didn't like mistakes. Sandra walked onto the set. She could feel that everyone was nervous. The scene they were about to film was very important. It was about pain and strength. Sandra knew exactly what she had to do. The cameras were ready. The crew stood still waiting. Then Jack called out, "Action!" Sandra started acting. Her voice was full of emotion. She gave everything she had to the scene. When she finished her final line, there was silence. Then Jack said, "Cut." Sandra let out a slow breath. She waited for him to say something about the scene. Maybe he would give her notes or tell her to change something. But instead he let out a small laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a disappointing one. "That's it," he said. Everyone around them got quiet. Jack stood up and walked closer to Sandra. Her heart was beating fast. She had worked with difficult directors before, but Jack was different. He always found a way to make people feel small. "Let's try that again," he said. His voice was sharp. "And this time act like you care." Sandra's stomach felt tight. She was used to people giving her feedback, but the way Jack said it was mean. And he made sure everyone could hear it. She took a deep breath and got ready to try again. She wouldn't let him get to her. She had to focus. The camera started rolling again. Sandra did the scene again, this time with even more feeling. She knew it was good. She could feel it. But as soon as she finished her last line, Jack stood up again. Then he said loudly, "Wow, has our star lost her shine?" Some of the crew members laughed. Not all of them, but enough to make Sandra's chest hurt. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he said them. Like he wanted to see her break. Sandra didn't move. She refused to let him see that his words hurt her. But inside something cracked. Was she the only one who felt this way? The set was so quiet after Jack's comment. Sandra stood still, trying to control how she felt. She had been in the industry for a long time. She had worked with tough directors, done long, exhausting shoots, and handled difficult moments. But there was a difference between pushing an actor to do their best and tearing them down in front of everyone. And Jack? He didn't know the difference. Sandra took a deep breath. She wouldn't let him see that he had gotten to her. But when she looked around at the crew, she saw something. Everyone had heard what Jack said. Some people kept their heads down, pretending to be busy. Others looked uncomfortable. And a few of them smirked. They were used to this. They knew how Jack worked. This was just normal to them. Because Jack Caldwell wasn't just a director who wanted things to be perfect. He was a bully. And no one was going to stand up to him. Sandra clenched her jaw. She had worked with amazing directors before. She had taken on some of the hardest roles. But something about this moment, being torn down in front of everyone, felt different. And worse, doubt started creeping in. Maybe she wasn't good enough anymore. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe she really had lost her shine. The thought made her stomach turn. No, she knew she was talented. She knew her worth. And she wasn't going to let one man take that away from her. Jack clapped his hands. The sound was loud in the silent room. "All right, people. Let's go again. Maybe this time our lead will actually show up." Sandra inhaled sharply but nodded at the assistant director. She had to get through this. Just finish the scene. Just prove him wrong. The cameras rolled again. Sandra threw herself into the moment. She let the character's pain take over. Her performance was stronger than before. She could feel it. And when she spoke the final line, it was perfect. Or at least she thought so. Jack's voice cut through the air. "Cut." Sandra looked up, breathing hard. She hoped this time he would approve. But Jack just shook his head. He smirked and said, "Still missing something. Maybe you should watch some of your old movies. See if you remember how to act." Some people laughed again. Not everyone, but enough. Sandra felt her chest tighten. She stayed still, kept her breathing even. But inside she was breaking. The room was filled with silence. Would anyone say something? Would anyone stand up to Jack? The crew looked at each other. Some of them looked guilty. Others looked relieved that they weren't the ones being targeted. Then Jack gave his final blow. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Sandra, sweetheart," he said, his voice fake sweet. "If the next take isn't better, I'll have to start thinking about a replacement." "Understood." A cold chill ran down Sandra's spine. He wasn't serious. She was the lead. The studio wanted her. But the message was clear. She was replaceable. And no one was going to stand up for her. She was alone. Or at least she thought she was. Because at that moment, someone new walked onto the set. And for the first time that day, things were about to change. Sandra tried to stay calm, but the door to the set opened. She turned her head slightly. That's when she saw him. Keanu Reeves. He stood in the doorway, quiet but strong. His eyes moved around the room. He didn't say anything at first. But from the way his eyebrows pulled together just a little, Sandra knew. He could feel the tension. He knew something was wrong. And Jack? Jack had no idea what was about to happen next. The air on set felt heavy. Sandra stood still, her hands curled into fists at her sides. She wouldn't let Jack see how much his words hurt. Jack sat in his chair, looking pleased with himself. He thought he had won. He thought no one would stop him. But then the door opened. Keanu Reeves stepped inside. He didn't rush. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked around. He had been on a lot of movie sets before. He had worked with tough directors. He had been in high-pressure situations. But this was different. The room felt tense, like everyone was afraid to breathe. It was clear Jack had sucked all the energy out of the space with just his words. And Sandra? She stood still, but Keanu could see it. Something had happened. Something wasn't right. And he wasn't going to ignore it. Jack finally saw Keanu standing there. For just a moment, his smug smile disappeared. Because Keanu wasn't just any actor. He was Keanu Reeves. A legend. Someone everyone respected, even people who didn't work in movies. Jack forced himself to smile and stood up from his chair. Well, the legend himself. Keanu didn't smile back. His face stayed calm. Hey, Jack. His voice was steady, but there was something sharp about it, like a warning. Jack pointed at Sandra, the actress on set. You're just in time to see your co-star in action. Or trying to, at least. A few people on the crew looked nervous. Sandra didn't react. But Keanu's eyes narrowed just a little. There was something dangerous in his look, the kind of look that made people think before they spoke. Jack didn't notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. He clapped his hands and turned to the crew. All right, let's do the scene again. I want a better time this time. He glanced at Sandra with fake kindness. Unless you need a break? Was a challenge. A dare. Before Sandra could answer, Keanu spoke. How about we take a minute? The whole set went silent. Jack turned his head, his smirk fading a little. Excuse me? Keanu didn't look away. A break. You've been making everyone do the scene over and over. I think we could all use one. Jack let out a small laugh. We don't have time for that. We're already behind schedule. Keanu tilted his head slightly. So maybe pushing people too hard isn't the best idea. Some of the crew members exchanged glances. Keanu wasn't yelling. He wasn't even arguing. But his words hit hard. It was the first little crack in Jack's power. Jack's smile tightened. I appreciate the concern, Keanu, but I know how to run my set. Keanu didn't blink. Then start acting like it. A wave of shock passed through the crew. Even Sandra's breath caught. Jack's face darkened. Excuse me? Keanu tilted his head again. Do you think making people feel small helps them act better? His voice was calm. Because all I see is a set full of people afraid to mess up in front of you. Jack's face twitched. Do you have any idea how many movies I've directed? Keanu nodded. And how many people walked away from them hating the experience? That one hit hard. Jack stiffened. He had no comeback. The silence stretched. Then Sandra stepped forward. Her voice was steady but strong. Keanu's right. Jack turned to her, his eyes narrowing. Sandra. But she didn't stop. This set isn't just about making a movie. It's about the people making it. She looked around at the crew. We all care about this project. But that doesn't mean we should be treated like we don't matter. A few people nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. Because the truth was they all agreed. They had just been too scared to say it, until now. Jack let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. You two are unbelievable. You think you can just walk in here and tell me how to do my job? He raised his voice. Anyone who has a problem with my methods is free to leave. Silence. But this silence wasn't fear. It was different. It felt like a moment where everything could change. Sandra met Keanu's gaze. Then she turned back to Jack. Then I'll go first. Gasps spread through the crew. Jack's face turned pale. Sandra, don't be ridiculous. She stepped back. No movie is worth my dignity. And no director deserves my respect if they don't give it back. She turned to the crew. Anyone else? There was a long pause. Then, something no one expected happened. The assistant director put down her clipboard. A camera operator stepped away from the rig. The script supervisor crossed her arms and nodded. One by one, people started making a choice Jack never thought they would make. Jack's control was slipping. And for the first time, he wasn't the one in charge. The sound of footsteps filled the air as crew members slowly moved away from their spots. Jack sat frozen, staring at what was happening. He had always believed fear and control made a great director. But now, his own team was walking away from him. And worst of all, it was Keanu and Sandra who had started it. Not everyone moved. Some crew members stayed where they were, scared to lose their jobs. Others exchanged looks, sharing the same quiet thought. Maybe they had put up with Jack's behavior for too long. 4 years they had taken his yelling, his insults, his idea of perfection. But now they saw they had a choice. Stand with Jack? Or stand up for themselves? One of the lighting techs, a man named Jason, stepped forward. He had worked on many movies before. He cleared his throat. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never hated coming to work more than I do here. Jack's eyes burned with anger. Excuse me? But Jason wasn't done. You don't push people to be great. You just break them. A few others murmured in agreement. Keanu and Sandra didn't say anything. They didn't need to. The crew was finding their own voices. The assistant director, a woman named Mia, crossed her arms. I've been telling you for months, Jack. Your way doesn't work anymore. Now you're finally seeing why. Jack let out a harsh laugh, trying to act like he still had control. So this is it? A rebellion? He shook his head. You all think you can just, what? Make this movie without me? No one answered. And that silence? That silence was louder than any argument. Sandra took a step closer, her voice steady. No one's saying the movie doesn't need a director, Jack. Her eyes narrowed slightly. We're just saying it doesn't need you. Jack stared at her. His face was blank, but deep down he knew he had pushed too far. And for the first time in his career, he was losing. Sandra straightened her shoulders. I meant what I said. If things don't change, I'm out. Jack clenched his jaw. You're under contract. Sandra's eyes didn't waver. Then I guess we'll see what matters more to the studio. This movie or a director who treats his crew like trash. Jack opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His hands curled into fists. His perfect control, his authority, it was slipping through his fingers and he had no idea how to stop it. The crew waited. For the first time ever, Jack Caldwell was the one who had to decide what happened next. And for the first time, he was the one who was afraid. Keanu finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was something strong in it too. The studio has a say in what happens next, just like you do. You are not the only one with power here. That was the moment John realized something big. He was not in charge anymore. He was not the only one making decisions. The studio, the producers, and the people working on the movie had power too. And right now, those people were upset. The lead actress and important crew members had just threatened to leave. When John looked around, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. He was alone. The whole set went quiet. A production assistant quickly walked away, probably going to tell the big bosses what had just happened. John clenched his fists. For the first time in his career, he wasn't in control of what happened next. The next meeting would decide everything. Would he still have a job after this? The studio's conference room felt colder than usual. Or maybe it just seemed that way because of the heavy feeling in the air. Sandra sat at the long table, arms crossed. Her face showed no emotion. She was calm but strong. Keanu sat next to her, steady as always. He didn't have to say much. Just being there was enough to show how serious this was. Across from them sat John Caldwell. He wasn't smiling now. Daniel Whitmore, the main producer, adjusted his glasses. He had already been told what happened on set. Now it was time to decide what would happen next. He flipped through some papers and then looked straight at John. Let's get to the point, Daniel said in a serious voice. This is not just about delays. This is about how people are treated on set. It's about how this movie is being run. John let out a dry laugh and leaned back in his chair. Come on, Daniel. Are we really doing this? I push my actors because I want the best from them. That's my job. It's what I've always done. Sandra's face didn't change, but Keanu tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on John. Daniel wasn't convinced. That's not the problem, John. The problem isn't how you push people. It's how you treat them. You don't respect them. Some of the executives in the room nodded. And for the first time, John looked nervous. Mia, the assistant director, spoke up. John, you don't just push people. You embarrass them. You make them feel small in front of everyone. And why? Just so you can feel powerful? John clenched his jaw. Oh, please. Sandra is a professional. She knows how this business works. Sandra finally spoke. Her voice was calm but strong. I do know how this business works, and I know the difference between a tough director and a toxic one. John rolled his eyes. Give me a break. Keanu leaned forward just a little. His voice was controlled but firm. She's not the only one, John. John went quiet. He knew what Keanu meant. This wasn't just about Sandra. The whole crew had spoken up, and now the studio was listening. Daniel sighed and set his papers down. Here's the situation, John. This movie cannot continue if the set is full of negativity and fear. The studio has put too much money into this film to let it fall apart because of power struggles. John stiffened. Meaning? Daniel glanced at the other executives before giving John the final warning. Meaning if you don't change, we replace you. John's face turned pale. He looked truly shaken for the first time. You can't be serious. Daniel didn't blink. Try me. The silence in the room was thick. No one spoke. Sandra and Keanu watched as John processed what was happening. He had two choices: fight back and risk losing everything, or swallow his pride and change. John looked around the room. He saw Daniel, the other executives, then Sandra, and finally Keanu. Keanu's calm but firm stare made something inside John crack. John took a deep breath and looked down at the table. What do you want me to do? Sandra raised an eyebrow. Keanu stayed still. And Daniel? He gave a small smile. John had just admitted defeat. But would he really change? That was the big question. John Caldwell sat there, silent. He was not in control anymore. The studio had spoken. The cast and crew had stood up to him. And now he had two choices: change or leave. John Caldwell wasn't ready to be replaced. During a break, Keanu and Sandra stood near the monitors, watching a scene they had just filmed. Sandra sighed. Do you think he'll actually change? Keanu took a sip of his coffee, thinking. People don't change overnight. He turned to her, his eyes knowing. But sometimes they change just enough. Sandra smiled. The weight of the last few days seemed lighter now. For the first time since filming began, she actually felt good about being here. As the camera started rolling again, Sandra gave her best performance yet. The entire crew watched, focused. Even John, standing behind the monitor, gave a small nod. But the real question remained, would John stay like this? Or was this just another act? Only time would tell. The set was different now. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. People still worked hard, but they no longer felt afraid. John was still strict, but he wasn't cruel. He gave advice without insulting people. He pushed actors, but not at the cost of their dignity. And Sandra? For the first time in a long time, she was enjoying her job again. One evening, after filming ended for the day, Sandra was packing up when she heard a voice. You were amazing today. She turned around. John stood there, hands in his pockets. She studied him, trying to see if he really meant it. Thanks. John hesitated before speaking again. I meant what I said before. I pushed too hard. I almost lost everything because of it. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Almost? John smirked a little. Let's just say I got lucky. He looked around at the set, where crew members were chatting and laughing, something they never did before. If Keanu hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't stood your ground, I wouldn't be here right now. Sandra crossed her arms. So what now? Is this the new Jack Caldwell? John sighed. I don't know, but I'm trying. She nodded. That's all anyone can ask for. A few days later, Sandra sat in her trailer looking through a new script. There was a soft knock at the door. Keanu stepped inside, his usual knowing smile on his face. Got a minute? She nodded and motioned for him to sit. He slid a folder across the table. Curious, she picked it up and flipped through the pages. Her eyebrows lifted. A new project? Keanu nodded. I read the script. It's good. And they want both of us. Sandra smirked. Another drama? Or something fun this time? Keanu chuckled. A little of both. She leaned back, tapping her fingers against the folder. And the director? Keanu grinned. Let's just say we get to pick this time. Sandra laughed, shaking her head. For the first time in a long time, she felt in control of her career, her choices, and her future. And as she looked down at the script, she knew one thing. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.